Hi everyone, welcome to Legal Talk with Stacy Clark. I hope you're safe and I hope you're doing well. Before we get started today, I wanted to flash my email on the screen so that you can write me and tell me what kinds of lawyers you want to see on the show in the future, what legal issues are keeping you up at night. That would be really helpful. My aim is to provide you with experts that can really help you, your family, or your business in some way. So here's my email address on the screen. No E's in Stacy, no E in Clark. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. But today, I'm very excited to have Lance Nelson, who is the chair of the Family Law Department at the highly respected law firm of MacElree, Harvey in Chester County. He's going to talk today about all aspects of divorce, alimony, custody, adoption. If you or a friend is going through a difficult time, and you think that they could benefit from this show, have them come close, because we're going to be advising on a lot of different matters. Lance has been counseling men, women, grandparents, seniors, same-sex couples, and so much more throughout his 25-year career. He has an uncanny ability to deal with both complex situations, let's say where business interests are involved, or there's a need to go to trial, as well as simple matters. He's been selected by his peers to be in the 2021 edition of U.S. News & World Report's Best Lawyers in America, which is a huge achievement for any lawyer. So, as always, I strive to bring you the best. Lance, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stacy. I'm happy to be here, and hopefully we can provide some useful information to your audience.
I know you can. Let's dive right in and hear about family law. Well, that's such a generic term. What
Sure.
does that cover?
It's a pretty broad area. I mean, obviously most people think about divorce. How do you get divorced? How do we divide our property? Who gets the house? How do you divide the pension? Do I get alimony? For how long? But there's also child support issues, and child custody issues are probably the next most common situation. You have adoption issues, which is a big issue for same-sex couples. Wedding season, we have prenuptial agreements.
Yeah.
And grandparents' rights has become a bigger issue, especially over the last 10 or 15 years or so, as we get an aging population that actually, in their retirement, are helping with their grandkids.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty broad area.
Okay. So, well, let's dive into the first area you mentioned. If the parties can't agree on a process to separate, no matter if they're seniors, or second marriages, third marriages, or first marriages, how does the process work?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important for people to know that probably 80+% of all cases end up in some kind of an agreement of some sort or another.
Oh, okay.
So there may be a skirmish in court about some little issue or that, but most of the time they lead towards an agreement. If you cannot reach an agreement, most of the counties, and each county is unique, they have a slightly different process, but the process is pretty much the same throughout southeastern or eastern Pennsylvania. There are masters, whether it's a custody master, a divorce master, support master, and a master is just a term for a lawyer that happens to work for the county.
Oh.
And they're there to help people resolve their disputes. So the master will initially try to mediate the dispute with the lawyers and the clients, and if they can't reach an agreed result that way, you'd actually have a hearing before a master. You'd have a support hearing or a custody hearing or a divorce hearing. The only exception, generally speaking, is judges are the only ones that can enter like a final custody order. So if it's a really knockdown, drag-out custody case, like I have starting next week, you end up having a trial before a judge. There are some appellate rights, but that's generally the process.
Okay. How do parties divide property? I mean, some people have been married for 30, 35 years. What's the process with that? And how is alimony determined?
Sure. You first have to decide, what are we dividing? And what you're dividing in a divorce is called marital property. Marital property is anything that the parties have accumulated during the course of the marriage.
Okay.
And there are some other exceptions that we don't need to get into at the moment. But it doesn't matter whose property it is. For example, you know, somebody has a 401k plan through Pfizer, obviously it's in their name, so it's their property, but it's accumulated during the marriage, so it gets divided.
Wow.
Pennsylvania has a series of factors. We call them equitable distribution factors. I'm not really going to get into the specific factors,
Yeah.
but what your viewers need to know is division of property is essentially income driven. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If the parties make about the same amount of money, then whatever they've accumulated is going to be divided relatively evenly.
Okay.
If you have one party that is significantly out earning the other party, then the dependent spouse or the lower earning spouse tends to get a higher percentage of the estate, maybe up to upwards of 60%.
Wow.
And the reason for that is the presumption is the higher earning spouse is going to continue to earn and continue to acquire assets, whereas the lower earning spouse probably is not. As far as alimony is concerned, it's really like a budgetary item. Mm-hmm. So alimony is an expense and needs-driven relief. So the parties would come up with budgets of what my budget is going to look like, how much my mortgage payment going to be, my car insurance after I get divorced, and we compare that to their income after they're divorced.
Okay.
So if there's a shortfall, in other words, you cannot support yourself
Yeah.
in the lifestyle that you were used to, then you're a candidate for alimony.
Huh. So anyone can get alimony, working, not working?
Correct. It's a function of what their expenses are, and those reasonableness of those expenses are based upon your lifestyle.
Right.
Like obviously you can't, if your monthly budget together was 10 grand, you can't say I have a $10,000 budget on my own when we get divorced.
I see.
But flip side of it is if you had a $50,000 marital budget, then the higher earning spouse can't complain when their spouse says I need 20 grand a month to support my lifestyle.
That would have been reasonable. Have you ever encountered this with seniors getting divorced? Some of the issues there?
I mean, seniors' divorces present a host of challenges. I mean, divorces in general are emotional processes.
Yeah.
And I think the lawyer's role is to try to minimize that as opposed to maximize that. But with seniors, you often end up with situations where you have a long-term marriage. Maybe one spouse wants to get divorced and the other spouse never even saw this coming. And you often end up with the kids, quote unquote, who are in their 40s and 50s, getting involved with mom and dad's divorce, which creates a whole host of family dynamic issues. The legal issues are kind of the same, but the family dynamic issues are more challenging.
Yeah.
And generally with seniors, the divorce part is actually not that hard because if they're retired, then their earnings are zero at that point. They're retired. So you're going to divide everything pretty evenly. You're going to divide the assets evenly. You're going to divide the retirement assets evenly. You're going to divide the pension. So basically, in a senior situation, both parties will be in a pretty much of identical situation moving forward. The challenge is they didn't see that happening, and they're moving forward with like half of what they thought they were going to move forward into their golden years with.
Something to think about for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you handle all of those kinds of clients with very passionate kid gloves to make
sure. It is, and the other
understands.
side of the senior situation is like a second or third marriage.
Yeah, tell us about
and they're trying to make sure they're presumably happy and they want to get married, but they want to preserve whatever they've accumulated for their children.
What's mine is mine.
What's mine, it goes to my kids, what's yours goes to your kids, and then you have the debate about what's ours and how we're going to deal with it. So we deal with those in prenuptial agreements prior to the marriage, and we kind of spell out what's going to happen if you get divorced, what's going to happen if you stay married, you know, does the party who doesn't own the house have a right to stay in the house for a certain period of time in a death situation, all of those kinds of issues. And again, oftentimes the children are the ones driving the prenuptial agreement because they want to make sure they're protecting whatever they think they're getting from their parents.
Do you find with seniors getting divorced, or I'm sorry, getting married again, second time, third time, do you find that a prenuptial creates a contentious situation or no?
It's actually easier because I think they've experienced life, they understand how things go, they know where they are with each other, and usually one party doesn't have a problem with the other party taking care of their kids. The most contentious, challenging prenuptials are actually younger kids that are getting married that happen to either own at the moment or are likely to inherit family wealth, whether it be a family business or something like that. So you're dealing with two 22-year-olds that are like, so excited to be married, and they've got the big wedding planned, and then, you know, mom or dad or somebody comes in and goes, oh, by the way, you got to get a prenuptial agreement. We love your fiance, but if it doesn't work out, she's not getting a piece of the family business, or he's not getting a piece of the family business. So those are actually probably the more challenging prenuptial agreements to deal with.
That's really interesting. Well, let's move on to custody. What are some of the difficulties that clients may face with custody agreements and working things out, and what if they're violated?
Yeah. And custody is one of those areas where there's a very high percentage of the time it works out.
Good to know.
And it may be contentious, but it generally works out. And there's two kinds of custody. Legal custody, which I call like the parenting component. Like both parents, 99% of the time, have the right to be involved in decisions regarding health, education, kids' activities, things like that. So both parents should be involved in the parenting portion.
Okay.
And then you have physical custody. And they throw all kinds of terms at physical custody, but it's really just boils down to who are the kids going to be with when? What's your schedule? And you can Google, you know, child custody in Pennsylvania, and you'll come up with 16 custody factors. They're all common sense kind of stuff. Custody, physical custody, more likely than not now, is some type of a shared arrangement between mom and dad. Doesn't necessarily mean it's 50-50, but both parents get to see the kids on a pretty regular basis, with two exceptions. And I like to call them geography and availability.
Okay.
You get divorced, geography is important because where are your kids going to school?
Yeah.
And how is mom going to get them to school? And how is dad going to get them to school? That doesn't mean they have to live in the same town or anything like that, but just can you physically do that based on where you're going to live? And then availability is what it sounds like. I mean, the biggest joke in Chester County is everybody has a flexible work schedule, which of course is not really true.
Oh, that is funny.
But if you have a very demanding job and you're working till 8 o'clock at night, then yeah, you're probably not in a position to have your kids that night, because by the time you get your kids, they're going to be going to bed.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by availability. But assuming those two things aren't an issue, it's pretty much worked out in one fashion or another.
What happens if someone violates the custody arrangement?
There is a contempt process. A custody order is a court order, and whether the court order involves a family law case or a civil case or a criminal case, there is a contempt process. So you would file a hearing or petition, have a hearing before a judge, and in theory the judge can do everything from fine you to award makeup time to, and I mean, I haven't seen this in a custody case, I've seen it in support cases and other cases, actually send you to jail. So like if your spouse isn't paying support under a support order, you could bring them before a judge. Unless they have a very good reason why they're not paying it, the judge can send them to jail until they pay it.
Now, these sound like emergency situations. Is there a place for someone to go in the thick of night to file such a complaint?
Not as it pertains to monetary issues. As it pertains to safety issues, then absolutely you can. First thing you do, as I always say to people, like if it's really an emergency and something's really happening, then call 911 before you call me. Like I can't go arrest your spouse for doing whatever. So the police would get involved, and there are processes through the district courts where they could enter like an immediate protection order or something like that if that was necessary on an emergent basis, either at night or on the weekends or something like that. Other than that, you have to file a petition with the court, wait for the court to assign a date, even in an emergency situation. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to probably take at least a couple days, if not a couple weeks.
Okay. How fast can people get divorced these days in Pennsylvania?
If they agree, which is always like the biggest hurdle, if they agree, you can file all your papers to get divorced 90 days after the divorce complaint's filed.
Oh, wow, 3
So
months.
You'll get the decree a couple weeks later, but yes, if you agree, it's 3 months.
Okay, and if you don't agree, it's just a matter of...
If you don't agree, then usually you have to go through the master process that we talked about,
Right.
and have a divorce hearing, and then the master decides how they're going to divide the property, if there's going to be alimony, etc.
In your history, 25 years doing this, have you seen a lot of contentious divorces and custody issues? I mean, for the most part, are people willing to agree, or do you see the fight, and how do you handle the fight?
It kind of boils down into two groups. I would say my average is probably not that much different than most people, although I do tend to end up with clients who know their case is going to go to court because I do go to court with some degree of frequency. But 80% of the cases do resolve, even if they start out emotionally contentious.
80% resolve, that's a huge number.
Even if they start out emotionally contentious, that may delay the resolution. It may not be emotionally possible to get people to a point to agree within the first 90 days. But usually that happens. The two types of cases that are most likely to go to a trial are cases in the divorce arena or support arena where you have a business owner or somebody that's self-employed, and in the custody arena where there's a relocation issue or like, unfortunately, we've had a lot more like addiction-related issues in the last decade or so.
Tell me about that. What do you mean by addiction-related issues?
Addiction-related issues involve everything from alcohol addiction, opioid addiction, untreated mental health issues, overtreated mental health issues, where people have mental health issues and they are on a lot more prescriptions than they need. So that, as you would imagine, creates a lot of uneasiness, unpredictability in custody situations, and a lot of people think, well, the custody judge will, there's not a custody judge waiting to hear your problems once a week as to whatever they're doing. So we get involved with, there's mechanisms to test people to see if they're maintaining their sobriety. There would be mechanisms to have mental health providers not tell us what they're doing with their client, but just say at this, once a month, at this point they're compliant and I have no issues. There's also, with alcohol-related issues, and I wish I bought stock in this company, but there's a company that produces a bracelet called a Scram bracelet. Like most people are
What's it called?
A Scram bracelet.
Scram bracelet.
And I'm giving them free advertising or whatever, but most people are familiar with the old-fashioned ankle bracelet.
Yes.
Okay, this is an ankle bracelet, except it measures alcohol that comes through your skin.
Ah!
So if
is
you
it
have
attractive, Lance, or no?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. It doesn't really go. It would not go with, even though it's a dark color, it would not go well with your outfit.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least I could put it under my pant leg or something. So those are some of the more problematic custody issues. Relocation, not to get total off on a tangent, but essentially parties have some type of a custody agreement. They live in Chester County. Mom decides she met the love of her life. He works in DC, wants to move to Washington with the kids.
Yeah.
It's not that far. I mean, it's not like you're never going to see your kids again, but you're not really going to have any meaningful during the week time with your kids.
Sure, that's hard.
So those usually end up in court, and judges hate them because there is no ability for the judge to kind of get people to compromise and resolve them. Either the person's going to move or they're not, and somebody's going to be unhappy. I actually had 2 relocation trials in the last 2 months.
They actually went to trial. 2 relocation trials. Wow, I could see that being a very hot topic. Well, tell us about support. How is that determined? I know you talked about alimony before, but now we're talking about the kids.
Correct. There are, wherever you live in Pennsylvania, Erie, Scranton, Philly, Chester County, there's a uniform set of support guidelines. So once you determine what the parties' incomes are, you feed it into these guidelines that tells you, okay, you have 3 kids, your support is X dollars. It will also tell you how to divide certain extras. Most common extras would be like private school tuition, medical expenses that are not paid by insurance, and the plethora of extra expenses that kids have.
Yes.
So travel, soccer, cheerleader camp, band, whatever it is. And most of those expenses are divided in proportion to income.
Okay.
Meaning if Dad makes 80% of the money and Mom makes 20% of the money, Dad pays 80% of private school, Mom pays 20% of private school.
I see. There is that formula.
Now that governs everything up to what we consider a high income case. And that actually guideline hasn't changed much in a lot. High income is considered over $30,000 a month in net income. So to put that in perspective, that means the parties have combined income of probably north of $500,000. Well, when they put that in place however many years ago, and now there's a lot more cases that fall into that range.
Yeah.
They still do the calculation, but you kind of really have to roll up your sleeves because it becomes an expense-based analysis at that point.
Okay. I understand that you handle adoptions and that you've handled same-sex adoptions as well, same-sex couples. Is there anything you want to tell us about adoptions today or some of the thorny issues that come up
Yeah,
so people can be aware?
we'll do like a typical step-parent adoption, like somebody gets remarried, the new parent wants, but most of the adoptions actually these days are same-sex couples.
Huh.
Everybody thinks, okay, same-sex marriage, we all know that got legalized, so they get the pleasure of going through the divorce process just like everybody else, and the support process. But until the legislature or court changes it, only the biological parent is considered a parent for legal purposes. Doesn't mean that the non-biological parent doesn't have certain rights, but they're not on the same level. So I encourage all same-sex couples that the non-biological parent needs to adopt the child. Once you adopt the child, then everybody's on the same footing.
Gotcha.
So obviously in the family law arena, that's important, but it's also important in the estate arena because they're their child, quote unquote, for purposes of inheritance.
So that's really interesting, and I know that one of your sweet spots is representing a person in divorce who has multiple business interests. And there may be some valuations needed, there may be some spin-offs that occur. Someone may be very confused as to whether a family lawyer, a divorce lawyer such as yourself could help them if they're in that kind of financial situation.
Certainly. Yeah, I do enjoy cases with divorces. I've had cases where the parties have had one business or 20 businesses. I think the most I've ever had is somebody that had 40 or 50 businesses.
40 or 50 businesses.
And the thing that divorce is obviously an emotional challenge, which I enjoy getting to know my clients, getting to understand what it is that they're concerned about. When you throw in a family business into the mix, it's not just the business, it's not just the numbers on the tax return or whatever.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's like the family. They built the business. This is their pride and joy. And they're very concerned about what's going to happen to this business. Is it going to survive? And when you're representing the dependent spouse that's not in the business, they're totally confused. They have no information about what really goes on in the business. And oftentimes they have perceptions about the successfulness of the business because they don't really know what goes on.
Sure.
So in those cases, we do have to engage valuation people, sort of like financial accountants that will put a value on a business, much like a transaction is. And that's what I explained to my clients. It's a transaction. You're buying out one of your shareholders in the business. Shareholder happens to be your spouse, and it's not a transaction you can choose not to finish. You have to finish it.
I never thought about it like that. That's
So,
really interesting.
You know, from a lawyer's perspective, I think if you're going through that process, it's not that I can value the business, but you have to know your way around a tax return. You have to know what a K-1 is and what's on the K-1, how to figure out what's on a financial statement or what you're going to find in a general ledger where. Because if you can't ask intelligent questions of your expert that is valuing the business, then you're never going to be able to ask intelligent questions of the other side and kind of intelligently argue your case to the court. Because in that situation, the lawyer is like the quarterback on the football team. The valuation person is the one that may be doing the heavy work, but the quarterback still has to kind of coordinate how that's going to be presented to the court and ultimately resolved.
I wish we had time to talk about so many more issues. That's why I know that we're going to flash some contact information for you. But before we go, are there top 1 or 2 points you want this audience to remember?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, if you only go through this, hopefully, you only go through this process once.
Right.
So you have to, number one, make sure whoever the lawyer is a good fit for you. And I would say you want a great lawyer, you just don't want an XYZ lawyer. It's like when you go to get a cancer doctor, heaven forbid your family has cancer. You want the best cancer doctor.
Yep.
You don't care whether they're old, they're young, they're a man, they're a woman, you just want the best.
Right.
And you want to be able to relate to them.
Yes.
Second is communication. How do you communicate with them? How do they communicate with you? So like my clients all have my cell phone number. Doesn't mean I answer my phone 24/7, but they have it.
Right.
And we have a team. So they know if I'm in court, my assistant or paralegal or someone else on our team can deal with their issue.
Right.
So if I'm on court or on vacation, that doesn't mean that they don't have to wait. Somebody will address their issue as soon as they can. And the third thing is cost. As you would imagine, like when you go to court, it costs money. How are you going to pay for that? How much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
And ask the lawyer, like, will you, through the process, engage in a cost-benefit analysis for me? Or are you just going to fight about every issue? Because it's hard to have a conversation with a client like, hey, Stace, I know this is really important to you. this is a $15,000 issue. You're going to spend 10 to resolve it. Is it really that important to you?
Right.
And sometimes it is, and sometimes I love going to court. It's like, as an athlete, that's the game. But it's not always in my client's best interest to be in that position.
I appreciate that, and that's why I can see you have so many happy clients and have done such a great job for so many people over the years, not just in Chester County, but all over the 5-county region. I want people to be sure that they know how to reach you. We're going to put up on the screen the address for your firm's website. It's www.MacElree.com. Again, I've been speaking with Lance Nelson. So his email address is, or your email address is very easy. It's lnelson@MacElree.com.
Yeah. If you Google Lance Nelson attorney, it's pretty much the only one.
Lance
Other
Nelson
than,
attorney.
I think there's somebody in Colorado or something like
Oh,
that.
okay. No, we want you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone watching and listening and learning. And again, my request that you send me any kinds of ideas that you'd be interested in hearing lawyers talk about in 2021. You are the heart of this show. Again, my email is stacy@stacyclarkmarketing.com. I look forward to seeing you next time, and I hope you've enjoyed today's program. Thanks.
Thank you, Stace.
Thank you, Lance.